Hello, and welcome to Small Business Success Stories at SCORE Houston. This is where we bring insights, experiences, and the journey of successful small business entrepreneurs. SCORE mentors volunteer their time to guide small businesses. SCORE is America's largest network of volunteer business mentors supported by the U.S. Small Business Administration. Here in Houston, we provide free confidential mentoring and education to help entrepreneurs start, grow, and succeed. Now, let's dive into today's small business success story.
Welcome to SCORE Houston podcast. I'm PV Bala, SCORE mentor and host for the podcast. Today's guest is Samantha Snabes, co-founder and CEO of Re3D, an Austin, Houston-based manufacturing company that has spent more than a decade making industrial-scale 3D printing accessible and sustainable for entrepreneurs and communities worldwide. Samantha is a veteran, an officer in the Air National Guard, a former NASA strategist, and the only woman CEO leading a US-based 3D printing hardware company that manufactures entirely in-house right here in America. Under her leadership, Re3D has served customers in over 55 countries, earned multiple federal SBIR awards, and in 2024, she was named SBI Houston District Innovation Recipient of the Year. Samantha, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
I noticed that you went from being a NASA contractor to quitting a job, moving to Chile, and starting a 3D printing company with your few colleagues. What was happening in your life at that time, and what made you believe this was actually worth doing?
Yeah, Re3D is an interesting company because we didn't intend to have a business from the beginning. We really were a group of friends and colleagues who were starting to work on this concept of an open source 3D printer project that would be shared globally to allow people to manufacture at point of need. And in that process of sharing this idea and meeting, we learned about a number of prize competitions, some for money, to help give us the resources to do that. So we started to share this concept outside of our friends and family online at that year in 2012. Instructables had a challenge to create independence. So we thought that was a good fit. And then we became a finalist in that. And right afterwards, we learned about Startup Chile. So we'd already had some of the documentation prepared around this vision and a video. So we shared that with Startup Chile and just kind of threw it out there, knowing that we'd have to have a business, but not even knowing if we'd get accepted because the company hadn't formed. And we found out that December that we'd been selected. So we got together on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day and came up with a name and the vision for Re3D and formed an LLC. And then that next week, I flew to Santiago. I was already commissioning in the Air Force. So I had taken a couple months off of work in order to become an officer. So it was kind of a natural transition for me because I was already on a break from my employment.
Samantha, I heard you over there. So you were traveling through parts of Africa and Latin America doing volunteer work when the idea of Re3D started to crystallize. What did you see on those trips that shaped the mission of the company from the very beginning?
Yeah, so even though Re3D is a company formed by accident, I'm learning in these travels in Nicaragua and Rwanda what we were doing is forming our problem statement and then thinking about product market fit and potential users. Because what happened is I was part of two organizations at the time, Opportunity International, looking at microlending overseas, as well as Engineers Without Borders, NASA Johnson Space Center, supporting an effort primarily in Rwanda. And, really well-intentioned organizations, but it wasn't until I got into country, I saw firsthand dilemmas with, really well-intentioned individuals that had brought in like equipment. I've always identified with hardware. I come from a background in manufacturing. And there was hardware laying around that was expensive, but it couldn't be maintained, or it was the wrong voltage or poor cultural fit. I also began to appreciate is how many goods and some of these communities were being imported in. And coming from Detroit in manufacturing, the open source 3D printing movement was started. And so my peers and I started asking, like, what would you do with a 3D printer? And what we learned very quickly as we were my role with NASA at the time too, as a social entrepreneur and residence for NASA headquarters, we started to connect with different aid groups and nonprofits and for-profits and potential users is they needed a printer that could make something they said at the human scale that could make a functional object like a toilet, a lower limb prosthetic, a birthing stool, a tool. They didn't want to make an iPhone case like a lot of my friends and I were making back in the States. We also learned at the time the purchasing threshold for a lot of credit cards and just taxation and whatnot was around $10,000. So from those informal interviews and those visits, we started to form this idea of an open source 3D printer that we said was toilet size because it was benchmarked around the dimensions for my favorite composting toilet in Muganero, Rwanda, and that it had to be under 10K. So that's what we started sharing in some of these competitions and then with Startup Chile.
So how do you design? I mean, you did the research, you did the boundary conditions, what the equipment need to be. How you went about innovating that? Now, how did you design? Your team was capable enough to come out with the design. How long did it take for you?
Yeah, so that was interesting. So again, while we were using a lot of business principles, we didn't realize we were doing it at the time till afterwards, which is kind of funny. But so when we got into Startup Chile, I arrived, I had one of my co-founders really small printer bot in a backpack. And I would use that as an example of what we were trying to scale up. Because it was open source, we were leaning into a lot of designs and electronics that were already kind of understood online in that supply chain.
Yeah.
But when I got to Startup Chile, I learned about 8 weeks later that they were going to have a booth at a tech festival called South by Southwest.
Yeah.
And that was just a couple hours. Well, some of my teammates were already in Austin and then somewhere in Houston, and we're just a couple of hours away. So I said, hey, if we can launch this in 8 weeks, can we launch it at your booth? And I knew from day one that whatever we came up with, because we would need money and more feedback, we were going to put on Kickstarter because almost every 3D printing company from 2009 to 2012 was doing that.
Yeah.
So I said, I will launch it on Kickstarter at your booth at South by Southwest. So that became the forcing function.
Yeah.
And then with Startup Chile, which is such a great program, if anyone's listening to this and wants feedback, please feel free to message me on LinkedIn. They gave you 40K equity free to start or scale your company. So we had a little bit of funding through Startup Chile, a little bit of global awareness because we'd applied to these other competitions that we were a finalist in. And then we used that, to make the testimonials and to get feedback on the page we were developing for Kickstarter that I worked on while the team was making the hardware. And then we timed it just right. What I didn't think about though, and where I always encourage anyone that's listening to this who's going into crowdfunding to take advantage of, is if you launch at a live event, particularly one like South by Southwest or a pitch competition, sometimes the first people to see you in a demo or the press, they get invited in early.
Yeah.
So we started the crowdfunding campaign I did from Santiago while the team was in Austin, and TechCrunch came in first with Engadget and Mashable and Forbes, and TechCrunch immediately put us on their main page and said 3D printing just got bigger than a bread box. And so Kickstarter then, in that first couple hours, made us a staff pick. So then we were on the front of their page. Well, then Startup Chile, being an accelerator, was super proud. So they're sharing our story. And South by Southwest organizers really liked the story of launching a company. So it was all these other people outside of us for free that were basically marketing the campaign. So we were funded in one day, 27 hours, just over one day. And then we met our funding goal. And instantly we're in over 20 countries too. So all these people that we didn't know were giving us feedback. So really it was that perfect combination of all those free, non-dilutive resources that then gave us the capital to grow out of a living room.
Wow, that's interesting. That's too many things happening in one go for you. Yeah, that's very fortunate too. See, most people, at least I come across in my mentoring experience, people who want to build a hardware company are told it is one of the hardest categories of business to scale. Capital intensive, complex and slow. But you chose to bootstrap and manufacture in US. How did you think about the decision? What are the trade-offs actually looked like in practice since you started?
Yeah, I would say we're not on the most competitive salaries. We're one of the few OEMs that's still around after 10 years. You will constantly have to take any profit you make. We've been fortunate to be profitable since that first day on Kickstarter. but 100% of that profit goes back into the company. So, we own a $110,000 CNC, and we're bootstrapping all the improvements on the facility we own. The only debt we right now have is a mortgage, but that means nobody has ever gotten a dividend. We're not at the highest pay scale.
Yeah.
We do offer health insurance, but it's it's a monthly premium. There's not like a super extensive benefits package. So the team knows that when they interview, but in the reality of it is there's been cycles where 3D printing has been very visible.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's been, I think, a little bit of hype around it. But the reality of it is we make a tool, and just like a CNC or any, like a circular saw or drill or whatnot, or a crane, that might not be a high growth business, but it's something really valuable. It's good, honest work. One thing that I always struggle with, and I am right now with the rising cost over the last year, is keeping the price point as low as possible, but also recognizing that we have to support the business. And so there's always like a tension and a lot of stress whenever we have a price increase, and figuring out, how to balance that and how to message it in a way that is honest.
So you don't do much of outsourcing. You try to do it yourself to confine the technology within yourself, your company, is it?
Yeah, we're vertically integrated, which has been a
Yeah.
blessing, because a lot of, for what we do in 3D printing, and I think some other tool providers as well, is that it does allow us to do custom solutions because we have our own supply chain. And, for a long time, there's been a lot of debate about not just outsourcing, but if we can get even high quality components that are from overseas cheaper.
Yeah.
We decided, because of our social vision, we were really going to
Okay.
commit more and more to local businesses and reducing our supply chain. We kind of got lucky in that, like we did in 2013, because now with nearshoring,
Yeah.
we're hoping, cross our fingers, knock on wood, there might be some subsidies. And
That's right. Yeah.
during COVID and some other times when supply chains were really compromised, we were able to still fulfill orders. So
Yeah.
I think it did benefit us, but it was at a huge sacrifice for sure. And definitely, if people were going to type it as risk, probably a riskier move.
That's true. Yeah. I read about Gigabot equipment that you have launched, and very interesting one. Now, tell me specifically what I know of 3D. What specific problem is it solving? The market till now was not addressing, and how is the market responding when you introduced it?
Yeah, so we compete on cost and scale. We still do today. There's a printer in China sold as a kit that is I think a little bit lower cost and cost per scale. They don't quite go as big as we do. So when you're looking at what we say is 600 millimeters cubed or 2 foot cubed in the built volume and larger, that's where we're unique. We also, again, because we manufacture it ourselves, we can do custom solutions. And what we find in 3D printing is, because it takes so many different materials,
Yeah.
customer needs sometimes are different. And so we're able, with our team, because we have experience now over a decade, to make those slight adjustments where some of our peers can't. We also say your printer comes with lifetime customer support, which we found has been really helpful in building trust, especially with the bigger companies. And then we made the decision early on, which has been really tough to maintain, that we said that any upgrade or improvement is available as a path to upgrade. So
Yeah.
I have customers right now that have a unit they received in 2014 that are now versioning it
Okay.
to the 2026 version. Sometimes they send it in, sometimes they buy a kit from us, but that gives us additional revenue. And then those customers oftentimes maybe initially got a printer because they thought they should, or it was for prototyping, but now they're looking at making something maybe internally or that's consumer based. So they start to grow with us, and they really like that. If maybe because there's a lot of capital outlay, if they buy 6 printers 1 year, in 3 years when they're ready to scale, they know they can version them
Yeah.
up and they don't have to start all over again.
See, I know that the market research I was doing on the AI, you have competition both in US and from Europe, and of course, China has a different level.
Mhm.
Do you have something unique to offer compared to the competition that you have been able to sustain and grow and with a loyal customer base and also been able to export? So you have some uniqueness about it?
Yeah, so besides cost and scale, paths to upgrade, and lifetime customer support, and the ability to do custom units. We basically carry two types of printers. One is the filament-based solution we started with. And then at the demand of our customers, we started developing one that has it looks like a bucket or a hopper on top. And that can take pellet or flake. And there is a trend right now for users to use pellet printing because it can be higher throughput. You can use more materials and it's lower cost. We did that because they wanted to explore through the SBIR program the ability to print from shredded up plastic waste. So we do have in the screw we selected, we've been really blessed that it does take a lot of different types of 3 to 5 millimeter flake, like regrind from trash. It also takes a lot of different types of pellets, which has been really cool for us because it turns out kind of like what happened in 2013 when we designed something for Engineers Without Borders, but big companies are buying it on Kickstarter. In around 2018, 2019, when we launched that, what we learned is there's a trend for people not printing from garbage to need that hardware as well, especially because it allows you to print with really soft materials that you can't get in filament. So there's a lot of dual use opportunity.
Oh, okay. Tell me, you mentioned about SBIR program. It's very unique. And you have navigated this program many times. Not many people are, especially the new entrepreneurs, are aware of SBIR program. Can you describe the process that actually is involved and what it took you to get it for the first time? And you got it done several times also.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I heard about SBIR really late. So I always, as soon as I meet someone starting a company, I tell them about the program because it's phenomenal. And then there's agencies like NSF that really try to help non-traditional and first-time recipients get selected. I was doing a program with the Unreasonable Institute with Barclays in Colorado, and they bet on kind of like moonshots that could change culture. And a number of these companies had the SBIR, and I'm like, what is this thing? So they told me about it, and I was like, this is so cool. Because I had this vision to try and print from garbage, but like you pointed out, it anytime you make a change to the printers or you have a new offering, you got to find the capital for it, and it's pretty tight as is.
Yeah.
So I went ahead and I found a university collaborator, and I was really excited and nervous about it and filled out a phase 1 application. And then when I went to submit, or I went to proofread it and submit that morning of it, because I always wait till the last minute, I was just sick to my stomach because NSF does this really awesome thing where the cutoff was like at 7 in the morning, and I thought it was 7 p.m. because every other deadline is always at night. So I called the National Science Foundation office and I was like, hey, I'm such an idiot. I have these letters of support. I have a university collaborator. I'm so embarrassed. And they're like, every cycle, there's a couple phone calls like this. And the lady was super nice. And she's like, I can't change it for you. But what I can do, she introduced me to her peers, and she's like, we can invite you to be a reviewer. And so then, because you're a first-time recipient or you're applying for your first time, maybe you can learn how to make your application better. So I had to wait that whole cycle out, but I did get to review. So then the second time comes around, I submitted the day of, but before 7 in the morning. And the panel, the reviewers came back with a lot of questions. What I learned later is the panel didn't recommend it. They said, there's going to be no market for a printer that prints from garbage. It's really, really hard. This isn't enough money. But the one thing about NSF that's really cool is the program director can still choose to give the funding, even if the panel voted against it. And maybe there's some caveats or milestones. And so we were extended the opportunity. They called me and said, hey, if you can answer these questions, I think you're really persistent. I want to give you a shot, but that it's going to be hard. That happened both in our phase 1 and our phase 2. But through that, we got multiple supplements. We also got a cash match from the government of Puerto Rico. I didn't know there was additional funding beyond it. We've had some phase 3s, and that then gave us going through that whole process, because the program directors are just great mentors. It gave us more confidence applying to other SBIRs and non-SBIRs. So now we have a $4 million NSF Convergence phase 2 award, which has been a huge honor and a learning curve in our first big BAA.
Yes.
It was all a result of the SBIR program and just really maturing us. But again, we came into it, I felt like kind of late, but I was so insecure and so nervous about the process in the beginning. And just can't say enough good things about the National Science Foundation team and their commitment to helping non-traditionals like learn that process.
Oh, lovely. Tell me, you are an active military officer right now, right?
Yes, sir.
And how do you manage, building, scaling, and multiple location of Re3D? Then you have an active duty as a military officer. So I was just wondering, what are the leadership challenge that look like for you to manage this company and playing that role also, you know, away from the company?
Yeah, I don't feel like I do it very well, especially right now. There's been seasons, I think, where I did it better. I think there were some years when I was a first lieutenant or an early captain, I thought I was killing it. But
Mhm.
as you move up in rank, it's more responsibility. And then
Yeah,
I think you also get older, a little bit more tired. The same with running a company over a decade. And there's definitely stretches where my house is not as clean as I would like it to be, or I should have prioritized working out because I have a physical fitness test, but I just can't seem to find the time or wasn't getting enough sleep. The good thing is it probably has served us well in that as an officer, I've learned some of the terms around like government processes and
Mm.
acronyms that helps us. And then, as you mature as a manufacturing company, you have to think about compliance. Right now we have security compliance, right? It's a big one that's coming down. But being in the military, I have kind of a leg up and that I understand that a little bit better, or I know who to call for assistance. So I think there was probably some benefit, but it's really challenging. That being said, some of the best entrepreneurs I've met were also reservists and veterans, and there's a phenomenal network out there, and
Yeah,
I can't imagine not doing either one.
exactly. Yeah, I can understand that. Tell me, Re3D is now recognized globally with customers in 55 countries. And, I'm just talking about any specific inflection point where you would feel the company shift from a survival mode to real forward momentum for growth.
Yeah, I still we've seen it so there's a type of 3D printer that uses liquid. It's really beautiful to watch. And one of the breakout opportunities of that has definitely been in some healthcare applications, especially dental. I think for our style of printing, admittedly, that killer app is still being defined, either because the standard isn't there, or there isn't the demand yet, or the materials I think have finally caught up. So I think for us, the reality of it is we will probably be an honest manufacturing company that is reinvesting our profit for a long time. That'll continue to take sacrifice, but along the way, as you get a few more teammates and a little bit more equipment, now we own our land and our building. You start to
Yeah.
have assets that help you with other things. So it does get a little bit easier. That being said, there's always problems. They just change and there's bigger consequences, I've learned.
Tell me, in my career, though I'm retired, I think last over 20 years I've been exposed to 3D printing. I
Yeah.
remember one gentleman from America coming when I was abroad and saying that, talking about the deposition, which is the 3D printing, you know.
Hmm.
But from I see your company's application also predominantly concentrated in aerospace, defense, medical, not really in the mainstream commercial manufacturing applications, I would say, isn't it? So, what needs to happen for 3D to get more into the commercial space?
Yeah, a
The-
lot of it comes down to standards and then also the capital outlay.
Yeah.
When General Motors, changed how they were doing wind tunnel testing using 3D printing, that was,
Mm.
I don't even know if it was a billion, but it was at least lots of millions of dollars of
Yeah.
investment to do that,
Yeah.
plus the risk. The reality is a lot of it comes down to standards. And there's even in pellet printing or
Mm.
FGF printing, there's not a standard test article yet. So the language is still being defined in the standards just for qualifying, not to mention then for specific applications like automotive, that's a 7-year planning cycle. And so if we're coming up, we have customers now like looking at making novel wiring harnesses for EV, you
Yeah.
have to comply that both the material, the manufacturing process, the standard for testing has to be there. And that's still being developed. That being said, we do have customers that are making consumer objects. We have a
Yeah.
customer that has over 80 units that's making thousands of units a month for a consumer
Mm.
application, making more money than us.
Mm.
And so it's totally possible, but their product was contingent on ANSI rating it and putting it on a new standard too. And it took a couple year of investment and a lot of risk on their end. So I think as businesses, assume that risk and then have the resources to make the investment, we'll see more, but it's still going to take a lot of time. Those things don't happen tomorrow. And that means in the meantime, companies like us that are already have limited resources have to maintain compliance and invest a lot in the capability to be eligible once those standards are defined.
Certainly for corporate engineers who retire, come to us seeking, product ideas where to invest. Now they hear about 3D. Some of them will listen to this podcast also. They'll find it very interesting. They'll come and ask, look, what kind of business I can get into using a 3D machine, which could be viable. Do you have anything to offer as an advice, what they should pursue?
Yes. Some of my favorite customers have done that. That third entrepreneurial window is probably the most exciting time. And, studies are showing they're very successful entrepreneurs. Where we see customers doing really well with 3D printing is they were the scientist, the engineer, the corporate leader for a very specific industry. And they know the people, the players, the standards, and the supply chain extremely well. And they have an idea. It's almost always something very non-sexy. So obvious. They're uniquely positioned to immediately get the buy-in from their peers to integrate it across the supply chain. It's super exciting. A lot of them, I feel like, really get hung up on IP and trying to get everything right and filing for all the protections. And the reality of it is, because it's a different form of manufacturing and the landscape is changing, a lot of those ecosystems. I have seen some people put too much time and effort on that side of it and not just getting the prototype and building, getting adoption, and then missing some of the upside that they could have had. Stealing this comment from someone, I think I was on a panel with either EOS or Stratasys or 3D Systems, but they made the comment that defense often will assume a lot of risks, and defense begets aerospace, which begets automotive, which then opens up the aperture for everyone else. So I think that's why a lot of us tend to get a lot of defense funding for development or early customers in the defense sector.
I remember that when you want to develop a prototype model, it's ideal to make it as in or 3D printing, and that could be a lot easier to make rather than castings and forgings and machining and all kind of things. Specifically on non-ferrous metal, kind of a product. So there it is very common, but in mass production, I'm yet to see something that is coming in the automotive space, automotive component space. That's a space from where I come from, from my career. I think that's a very, very extremely competitive field. So for 3D to, be on par, it has to be something very, very complex shapes, which 3D can achieve, where in the traditional manufacturing of engineering may be more difficult to achieve, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, we definitely see use cases now, especially with EV. That's been
Yeah.
a great accelerator, like, lightweighting and new configurations for holding things and mounting. Yeah, a lot of it is very, very non-sexy stuff.
That's true. Yeah. Tell me, our listeners, entrepreneurs who succeed in manufacturing or want to get into deep technology items, what traits or behavior trends separate the ones who succeed and those who don't? What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think success is pretty subjective. Some people might say I'm successful. I definitely don't feel like that today. And if you ask our team, there's always some fire and stress and whatnot when you're too close to the flames. I think, I think the individual has to decide what their motivation is. If they're doing it for money, if they're doing it just to get picked up in Forbes, if they're doing it to, some people I've noticed, entrepreneurs just really feel successful if they get invited to a lot of panels and get a lot of visibility that way. Some people are they like the volume of sales and not just the dollar amount, but having, reach or awards. So I think figuring that out is definitely number one. I think Re3D has more of a model around conscious capitalism. So we have a different view on what makes us successful. So if we're just selling to someone that's using our hardware to make a lot of money, and then we do too, it probably wouldn't be fulfilling. One of our senior engineers likes to say, I like to solve wicked hard problems, but we kind of like the challenge and pushing the envelope and finding a gap in the community. And then the social aspect of the company is really motivating for a lot of us, and the sustainability component. So I would just encourage individuals to just be really honest with themselves and their families. When we started the company we were kind of like a club for a couple of years there in 2011, 2012. We weren't thinking about what it would look like to run a business 15 years later.
Yeah.
And at day to day, and the sacrifice it wouldn't take. This is my second venture, and I was still really naive. So yeah, I think it's good to just do a lot of soul searching up front. The people I see that tend to do well know what that North Star is. They know what makes them satisfied, especially if they're later in their career. And then they're willing to take all of that risk and sacrifice to fulfill that. And then they tend to feel successful and pretty happy.
So tell me, for the future of the company, what's your vision? How do you see Re3D moving in the next 3 to 5 years? And what do you have in mind as a leader?
Yeah, I used to say that, our guiding star with our ethos was to maintain, be true to them and to create second and third offsets by creating 500 jobs in 5 years. I think I've kind of steamrolled our one-on-ones this year with the team, but I think it has shifted a little bit in the next 3 to 5 years. We do have some opportunities to potentially get a printer into space that can print from waste or on the moon. And I think that's really motivating to our team, and not necessarily, the ethos that we initially developed. But I think it's still exciting and motivating for our team. We just purchased land and a facility, and we want to give camps and workshops and have this be a living and breathing resource for the community. And that's going to take, in addition to building improvements, a lot of lift over the next 3 to 5 years to really make that, where we all as teammates want to go. And then we have a shipping container that has printers that could print with waste or non-waste for point of need manufacturing. We've had a few contracts now. And so our goal with that is to try and really get into areas where there's a lot of deep need, whether it's a camp with displaced persons or, a really austere environment. So I think we'll be putting a lot of focus on that. And then finally, when it comes to large format 3D printing, part of the reason why Bamboo and some of the Chinese printers have done so well is they were really stretching on the desktop level. But most of those features haven't been incorporated yet into the big system. So I think both for myself and any other peers we have, our team wants it too. We have to figure out how to make the printers more plug and play.
Yeah, yours is one of the rare manufacturing companies. We don't come across too many manufacturing companies, starting business here. So I don't know, I was just wondering if you have your machine and you are able to encourage entrepreneurs to come for manufacturing using your machine. That will be a great contribution to the community here. Yeah.
Yeah. The customer that has over 80 printers is a US-based company. Their operations are in another country, but yeah, we definitely need to see more people doing it. And for the supply chain itself, there's just a lack of components you can get. So common things I encourage people to get into, if someone can be a stepper motor producer in the US, we need lots of people in that. Lots of people making limit switches and touchscreens, common components that right now we have to source from afar, and sometimes they're hard to quality control. I think there's a real need for people to get into the non-sexy components too that are shared across so many verticals.
Correct. Thank you, Samantha. Thanks for participating in the podcast. Really great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Please feel free to come by for a tour and learn more about us at re3d.org and hit me up on LinkedIn if you want to have a conversation.
Sure. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Small Business Success Stories at SCORE Houston. If you are an entrepreneur or small business owner, we'd love to support your journey. You can reach us at 713-487-6565 or visit us at 8701 South Gessner, Suite 1200, Houston, Texas, 77074. Our office is open Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., except for federal holidays, and walk-ins are always welcome. To learn more, request free mentoring, or register for our workshops, visit us online at www.score.org/Houston. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and remember, at SCORE, we're here to help you thrive.